The satellite feed cut to static at 3:47 hours, and with it, any hope of finding Captain Kestrel Vance alive. The Indonesian jungle had swallowed her F-16 whole, no explosion, no ejection beacon, just the sick twist of metal through canopy and the terrible silence that followed. Command wrote her off within 6 hours. They always did when the terrain turned hostile and the pilot went dark. But 3 days later, a frequency crackled to life on an abandoned channel, one they hadn't monitored since the Cold War. The voice was female, steady as a held breath, and it said only this: "Firewatch Actual, this is Shadowline. I have eyes on the target. Repeat, I have eyes on the target." Then nothing. Static again. The operations room at Yokota Air Base froze. Colonel Marcus Grayson, a man who'd flown combat missions over Belgrade and Baghdad, stared at the console like it had grown teeth. That call sign, Shadowline, had been struck from active duty logs 2 years ago after a training incident in Nevada left 3 aircraft grounded and 1 pilot's career in ruins. Kestrel Vance had been the scapegoat, the one they'd blamed when a formation broke protocol during a live-fire drill. She tried to abort. They didn't listen. The Board of Inquiry labeled her overly cautious and lacking command instinct. They'd shuffled her to reconnaissance work, solo flights over contested airspace where no one had to trust her judgment but herself. Now she was supposed to be dead, her aircraft a smoking crater somewhere in Sumatra's emerald hell. Yet here was her voice, calm as Sunday morning, breaking through on a ghost frequency with target coordinates no one else could have acquired. Grayson leaned into the microphone. "Shadowline, say status." Silence. He tried again, his voice harder. "Shadowline, this is Firewatch Actual. Confirm position and status." Nothing but the hiss of empty air. Lieutenant Haru Nakamura, the youngest intelligence officer in the room, pulled up the last known telemetry. The F-16 had been tracking a suspected arms convoy through the jungle when it vanished. No SAM warnings, no hostile radar signatures. Just gone. But if Vance was alive, if she was on the ground with eyes on the convoy, it changed everything. The mission had been reconnaissance only, a low-priority sweep. Now it was something else. Grayson looked at the map, at the red circle marking her last known position, and felt the cold knot of command tighten in his chest. 3 days in that jungle would break most pilots. Kestrel Vance wasn't most pilots, though. She'd survived something worse than terrain. She'd survived them. The convoy was moving. Satellite imagery confirmed 12 vehicles, heavy trucks with canvas covers and escort jeeps mounted with machine guns. They were heading toward the coast, toward a port where international waters would make interdiction nearly impossible. Kestrel had gone down 40 kilometers east of their route, deep in a region where the jungle grew so thick that helicopter extraction was a prayer, not a plan. Yet somehow she'd moved. Somehow she'd found them. Grayson authorized a rescue operation within the hour, but the orders came with a caveat from higher up the chain. Secondary objective takes priority. Translation: get the convoy intel first, the pilot second. It was the kind of calculus that made men hate their jobs, but Grayson had been in the Air Force long enough to know that arguing would only delay both outcomes. He assembled a task force: 2 Apache gunships for close air support, a Black Hawk for extraction, and a combat rescue team led by Master Sergeant Elias Corin, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the same stone as Mount Rushmore. Corin didn't ask questions. He just checked his rifle and nodded. The flight to the coordinates would take 90 minutes. 90 minutes to reach a woman who'd been written off as dead, who'd been abandoned by a system that never believed in her instincts. Nakamura handed Grayson a file before he left for the flight line: Vance's service record, the incident report from Nevada, the disciplinary notes. Grayson scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. She'd called the abort because she'd seen a systems malfunction in her wingman's aircraft. She'd been right. The board had buried that detail in footnotes, chose to focus instead on her hesitation under pressure. They'd turned competence into cowardice with a few choice words in a report. Now she was in the jungle with a target no one else could locate, and her voice on that radio had been the calmest thing Grayson had heard all week. The Apache lifted off first, their rotors chewing through humid morning air. The Black Hawk followed, Korin and his team strapped in with weapons ready and faces blank. They flew low, skimming treetops, following a terrain map that showed nothing but green for miles. The jungle below was a living thing, dense and indifferent, the kind of place where a human being could vanish in seconds. Yet Kestrel was down there somewhere, breathing, watching, waiting. Grayson stayed on the radio, monitoring frequencies, hopping for another transmission. It came 20 minutes into the flight. Her voice again, quieter this time, almost a whisper. Firewatch, they're stopping. Grid November 7-3 Whiskey. Estimate 22 hostiles, small arms and RPGs. I count 2 HVTs in the lead vehicle. Then, after a pause that stretched like wire, I'm concealed. Do not acknowledge this transmission. Grayson didn't. He relayed the coordinates to the gunships and watched the mission clock tick forward. She was feeding them real-time intelligence from inside enemy territory with nothing but a survival radio and whatever gear she'd salvaged from the crash. No backup, no extraction guarantee, just her voice and her eyes and a will that wouldn't quit. Nakamura pulled up drone footage of the area, grainy, delayed, but clear enough. The convoy had indeed stopped. Men were unloading crates, moving with the efficiency of a trained unit. This wasn't a smuggling operation. This was military. The Apache reached weapons range and held position behind a ridgeline waiting for the order. Korin's team prepared for fast-stroke deployment. Grayson made the call. Shadowline Firewatch actual. Strike inbound in 90 seconds. Mark your position with IR strobe. Another pause. Then her voice, so quiet he almost missed it. Negative on strobe. Too close to hostiles. I'll mark after the first pass. She was less than 100 meters from the convoy. Any closer and she'd be inside the blast radius. Grayson felt his throat tight. He gave the order anyway. The Apache came over the ridge like avenging angels, their 30 chain guns roaring. The jungle erupted in fire and noise, trees splintering, vehicles exploding, men scattering like ants. The second Apache locked onto the lead vehicle and sent a Hellfire missile straight through its engine block. The explosion was white-hot thermal bloom lighting up the drone feed. For 5 seconds, the jungle was chaos. Then silence. Grayson keyed the radio. Shadowline confirmed status. Static. His pulse hammered. Shadowline respond. More static. Then her voice, breathless but steady. I'm good. 30 meters north of burning truck. IR strobe active. Tell your boys I'm the one not shooting at them. Korin's team dropped from the Black Hawk like stones, hitting the ground in a defensive perimeter. Korin himself moved toward the strobe, weapon up, scanning. He found her crouched behind a fallen log, her flight suit torn and filthy, her face streaked with mud and blood. She looked up at him with eyes that didn't blink. Took you long enough. Korin grinned despite himself. Ma'am, you're supposed to be dead. She stood, favoring her left leg, and slung her survival rifle over her shoulder. I got better. They moved fast, the team forming a protective shell around her as the Black Hawk descended into a clearing 50 meters away. The rotors whipped the jungle into a frenzy, leaves and dirt swirling. Kestrel limped but didn't slow, her jaw set, her focus absolute. She'd been alone for 3 days, hunted by terrain and circumstance, yet she moved with the precision of someone who'd never stopped being a pilot, never stopped calculating angles and distances and outcomes. As they lifted off, Grayson's voice came through her headset. Shadowline Firewatch, good to have you back. She didn't answer right away. She watched the jungle fall away beneath her, the smoke from the convoy rising in black columns, and for the first time in 72 hours, she let herself breathe. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Good to be back, sir. But she didn't sound like someone who believed it. She sounded like someone who knew the fight wasn't over, that the voices who doubted her would still be waiting when she landed. Korin handed her a bottle of water. She drank half in one pull, then looked at him. They get good footage of the convoy, he nodded. Every frame. She nodded back. Good, that's what matters. The debriefing took place in a sterile conference room at Yokota, the kind with fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Kestrel sat at the table in a borrowed uniform, her leg bandaged and her hair still damp from the shower. Across from her sat Grayson Nakamura and a civilian intelligence analyst named Victoria Dahl, who wore glasses too large for her face and spoke in clipped, precise sentences. They wanted details. How had she survived the crash? How had she tracked the convoy? How had she avoided detection for 3 days? Kestrel answered each question with the same flat calm she'd used on the radio. The crash had been mechanical failure, a hydraulic line rupture that sent the F-16 into an uncontrolled spin. She'd ejected at 2,000 feet, too low for comfort, and landed in a river that probably saved her life. The chute had dragged her downstream for half a mile before she cut loose. She'd salvaged her survival kit, her sidearm, and her radio. No food beyond 2 protein bars. No medical supplies beyond a basic first aid pouch. The convoy she'd found by accident. She'd been moving west trying to reach higher ground for a better signal when she heard engines. She'd followed the noise, staying parallel to their route, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid patrols. When they stopped, she stopped. When they moved, she moved. For 3 days, she'd been a ghost. Dahl leaned forward. "You engaged in no hostile action." Kestrel met her eyes. "I'm a pilot, ma'am, not infantry. I observed and reported. That's the mission." Dahl made a note. "And you felt confident the convoy represented a credible threat." Kestrel's expression didn't change. 22 armed hostiles transporting military-grade hardware toward a port. "Yes, ma'am, I felt confident." Grayson cut in, his tone softer. "Captain, you did exceptional work out there. The intel you provided led to the interdiction of a weapons shipment destined for a known insurgent group. You saved lives." Kestrel nodded once. "Thank you, sir." But her voice carried no warmth, no relief. She looked like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop, and she didn't have to wait long. Dahl closed her folder. "There will be a formal review, of course. Standard procedure for any incident involving aircraft loss and unsupervised ground operations. Your actions will be assessed for protocol compliance." Kestrel's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Grayson dismissed her after another 20 minutes of questions. She stood, saluted, and walked out without a word. Nakamura watched her go. "She just gave us the biggest intel win of the quarter, and they're talking about a review." Grayson rubbed his eyes. "They'll look for any reason to say she broke protocol. That's how it works." Nakamura's expression darkened. "That's insane." Grayson didn't disagree. He just looked tired. Outside, Kestrel stood on the flight line, watching a pair of F-16s taxi toward the runway. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She'd always loved this time of day, the way the light turned everything soft, but now it just felt distant, like something happening to someone else. The review board convened 2 weeks later. Kestrel sat alone on one side of a long table while 5 officers sat on the other, their uniforms crisp and their faces unreadable. They asked the same questions Dahl had asked, then new ones. Why hadn't she activated her emergency beacon immediately? Why had she moved toward the convoy instead of away? Why had she waited 3 days to make contact? She answered each question with the same measured tone. The beacon would have given away her position to hostiles. Moving toward the convoy was tactically sound given the intelligence value. She'd waited because the ghost frequency was her only reliable option, and she needed to confirm the target before risking transmission. The board listened, made notes, and gave nothing away. The lead officer, a brigadier general named Cartwright, leaned back in his chair. "Captain Vance, your actions resulted in a successful interdiction. No one disputes that. But your decision to pursue a ground reconnaissance mission without authorization raises questions about judgment and adherence to command structure." Kestrel kept her voice level. "Sir, I was shot down behind enemy lines. I used available resources to complete the mission objective, reconnaissance. I reported what I found. I don't see how that constitutes a breach of protocol." Cartwright's eyes narrowed. "You see, Captain, that's precisely the issue. You don't see it. Just like you didn't see it in Nevada when you aborted a training exercise without authorization. There it was. The real reason for this review. They hadn't forgotten. They'd just been waiting for another chance." Kestrel felt something cold settle in her chest, but she kept her face blank. "Sir, I aborted that exercise because my wingman's aircraft was experiencing a malfunction that would have resulted in a crash. I was correct." Cartwright smiled thinly. "The board at the time disagreed. They found your actions premature and disruptive. Now here we are again, with you taking unilateral action in a high-stakes environment." Kestrel said nothing. There was nothing to say. The fix was in, just like it had been before. Cartwright continued. However, given the positive outcome of your recent actions and the intelligence value you provided, this board has decided not to pursue disciplinary measures. You will receive a letter of counsel regarding adherence to protocol, but no formal reprimand. It was a hollow victory, and everyone in the room knew it. A letter of counsel was still a black mark, still something that would follow her through every fitness report, every promotion board. She'd saved lives and delivered critical intelligence, and they were giving her a slap on the wrist for doing it right. She saluted. "Thank you, sir." Her voice was empty. They dismissed her, and she walked out into the hallway where Grayson was waiting. He fell into step beside her. "I'm sorry, Kestrel, I fought for you in there." She believed him. "I know, sir." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Grayson stopped. "You're one of the best pilots I've ever worked with. Don't let them take that from you." Kestrel looked at him, and for the first time her composure cracked just slightly. "They already did, sir, 2 years ago." 6 months passed. Kestrel flew her missions, reconnaissance sorties over empty ocean, routine patrols that required no decisions and offered no glory. She was good at her job, meticulous and professional, but the spark that had once defined her was harder to find. She'd learned the lesson they wanted her to learn. Keep your head down, follow orders, don't make waves. It was the safest way to survive in a system that didn't trust her. But survival wasn't the same as living. She knew that. Late one evening, she sat alone in the squadron-ready room reviewing flight logs. The room was empty, the base quiet. On the wall hung photos of pilots past and present, their faces frozen in moments of triumph. First solo flights, combat deployments, promotions. Her photo was there too, from years ago, back when her smile had been real. She barely recognized the woman in that picture. The door opened. Nakamura walked in, holding a tablet. "Captain, you got a minute?" She glanced up. "What's up, Haru?" He sat down across from her, his expression uncertain. "I've been going through classified intel reports. There's something you should see." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a memo from the Defense Intelligence Agency, dated 3 weeks prior. It detailed the impact of the convoy interdiction in Indonesia. The weapons seized had been traced back to a trafficking network spanning 4 countries. The operation had disrupted supply lines to 3 insurgent groups and led to the arrest of 2 high-value targets. Lives saved, estimated in the hundreds. Mission success attributed to actionable intelligence provided by Captain Kestrel Vance. Kestrel read it twice. "Why wasn't I briefed on this?" Nakamura hesitated. "Because it's classified above your clearance level. I'm not supposed to be showing you this." She looked at him. "Then why are you?" He met her eyes. "Because you deserve to know what you did mattered, not just tactically, strategically. You changed the operational landscape in that entire region." Kestrel sat back, the words settling over her like weight. She'd known the mission was successful. She hadn't known it was that successful. Nakamura continued. "There's more. The DIA has recommended you for a commendation. It's being reviewed by the Pentagon." She almost laughed. "They gave me a letter of counsel 6 months ago." Nakamura shrugged. "Different chain of command. The DIA doesn't care about internal politics. They care about results, and your results speak for themselves." For the first time in a long time, Kestrel felt something stir in her chest, not hope exactly, but something close. Recognition. Validation. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the people who mattered saw what she'd done for what it was. Nakamura stood. "I'll deny this conversation ever happened, but I thought you should know." She nodded. "Thanks, Haru." He left, and she sat alone with the memo glowing on the screen. Outside, the night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. She thought about the jungle, about the 3 days she'd spent moving through green hell with nothing but her wits and her will. She thought about the voice she'd heard on the radio, her own voice, calm and deadly, calling in the strike. That voice hadn't asked for permission. It had simply acted. 3 months later, the commendation came through. It wasn't a medal, those required different criteria, but it was an official recognition from the Defense Intelligence Agency, signed by a deputy director whose name carried weight in Washington. The ceremony was small, held in a briefing room with a dozen people in attendance. Grayson pinned the certificate to the wall beside Kestrel's photo. He shook her hand. Congratulations, Captain, this is long overdue. She smiled, a small, real smile. Thank you, sir. But the recognition, as meaningful as it was, didn't erase the past. It didn't change the fact that she was still flying routine missions, still sidelined by a system that remembered her failures more than her successes. She knew that. What she didn't know was that someone else was watching. Colonel Adrian Parrish was a legend in Air Force Special Operations, a pilot who'd flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts, and now commanded a classified unit tasked with high-risk reconnaissance in denied territories. She'd read Kestrel's file after the Indonesia incident, read between the lines of the disciplinary notes and the commendations, and saw what others had missed. A pilot with instincts sharp enough to survive the unsurvivable and judgment sound enough to turn chaos into mission success. Parrish made a call to Grayson. "I want Vance for my unit." Grayson hesitated. "She's got a complicated record," Parrish laughed. "I don't need simple, Marcus. I need capable. Can she do the job?" Grayson didn't hesitate this time. "Yes, absolutely." 2 weeks later, Kestrel received orders. Temporary reassignment to a unit with no public designation, no official roster. The briefing was held in a secure facility off base. Parrish herself delivered it. She looked at Kestrel with eyes that missed nothing. "You've been flying boring missions for too long, Captain. I'm offering you something different. High-risk reconnaissance in contested airspace. Solo operations. No backup unless you call for it. The kind of work that requires someone who can think on their feet and doesn't need permission to do the right thing." Kestrel felt her pulse quicken. "What's the catch?" Parrish smiled. "The catch is that if you screw up, no one will know you were there. And if you succeed, no one will know that either. This isn't about glory, it's about getting the job done." Kestrel didn't need to think about it. "I'm in," Parrish nodded. "Good. Training starts Monday. Don't be late." As Kestrel walked out of the briefing, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the hollow satisfaction of routine, but the deep, burning certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The sky was waiting. And this time, no one would tell her she couldn't fly into it. She thought about the jungle, about the voice she'd found in the silence, and she smiled. They'd tried to bury her under protocols and politics, under the weight of other people's doubts. But she was still here, still flying. And she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and Kestrel Vance had never been afraid of a fight.